Hello there, Joe the CRM chap here, and we're back once again with a new video in my series focused on providing a set of revision tools for Microsoft Exam MB-400. This is the developer's exam for those who are building solutions on top of either Dynamics 365 or the Power Platform. So today we're going to be taking a look at how we can use the Ribbon Workbench to perform ribbon customizations. So the ribbon is what you see in a model-driven app when you're on a record form, an entity form, or something like that. So for example, being able to save, being able to create a new record, all of those are command buttons on the ribbon. And what we can do as developers is actually go on there, we can customize those existing buttons, or we can even add new ones on. So what we're going to do today, we're going to go onto the contact entity. We're just going to add on a very simple button that lets us open up this the make.powerapps.com portal up there, and so as part of that, hopefully you can then see from start to finish how you can perform a very simple and basic button customization. So before we jump in and start actually doing the updating the ribbon and things like that, we first of all need to set up a temporary holding solution for our changes within our environment. So we're in our MB-400 tenant up here. I'm just going to create a new solution. I'm just going to call this our ribbon changes. We'll call this tag just a default publisher on that. And the reason we do this is so that when we're performing the ribbon updates and changes, we're not having to wait a long time for basically the changes to be both exported out and imported in. We're just including in the entities that we want to customize. So typically, if you're working with larger solutions, you might start to see speed problems if you are doing complex or simple ribbon amends in the future. So all we need to do on this is just add in our contact entity. If I just scroll down to here, press next. We don't need to add on any components, we just want the entity definition in of itself. Okay, and at this point then we're ready to go. So we've done what we need to do now in the Power Apps portal. Now we need to move across to a little tool called the XRM toolbox. So if you, let me just drag it across just to make it nice and visible. Yep. So if you haven't used this tool before, I definitely would recommend that you check it out. It does have a lot of useful features that can help you perform common tasks. So whether you're looking just to sort of maybe just run a check to see what access a user has, create attributes from a spreadsheet, there's loads of little apps in here that can really help you along. And the app that we're most interested in today is the Ribbon Workbench by Scott Duro. So this was added onto the XRM toolbox, I think a couple of years back. You can also get this tool as a managed solution and import it into your environment, but typically this is probably the better way of working with it. So we're going to open up the tool. We're going to be prompted to select the environment we want to work with. So I'm just going to select my MB-400 down here. It's going to take a minute just to get connected and hooked up. Then here we go, and at this point then we can then add on and export out the solution that we want to work with. So it's Ribbon Changes is the one that we want to work with today. It's going to take a minute just to download. Okay, and here we go. So we can see we've got the, it's loaded up basically everything to do with our particular entity, our contact entity. And what we can see on the screen here is that we've got the various different ribbons that are available for customization here. So whether you're working on the main area of the application, the home area, whether you're working with the records on a subgrid or a view, or at the form level, all of the different buttons that are potentially exposed out are listed around here. And we can click on any of these particular buttons and just inspect the properties in a bit more detail. So we can see on the Activate button, it's got a few different labels on there. It's also pulling in some custom images. So all of these we can customize for our own buttons if we want to add them on. So let's do that now. Let's add on a button. We want to have the button on our main contact form. So in the toolbox down here, I'm just going to drag on the button over here. It adds that on. We can see it gets added down here into our solution elements down here as a sort of component. And at this point, we can start to customize this button out. So I'm just going to rename the label on this, just to say Open Power Apps. There might be some additional things that I want to do, such as example tooltip maybe. If I've got some, typically when you're building these buttons out, you would want to have a 16 by 16 and 32 by 32, and even a modern image if it's the unified interface. So you've not just got a sort of a rubbish-looking image showing for each button. But we're not going to worry about that too much today. So I add my button on, but at this point, so the button will render on the form, but it's not actually going to do anything. In order to actually build a useful button, I need to look at adding on a command. So if I click on the button down here under commands, I get a new command appear down here. So how commands work is they're basically, there's three things you need to define for them. The action, so what happens when the user clicks it. And these next two are optional, as we can see. You can also have display rules, so you can toggle whether the button is actually displayed based on different rules in the application. And also, again, the same for the enable rules. So we can see when we do add display rule, we get an option down there. For the add actions, we've got essentially two actions that we can perform with buttons. We can either open a URL, or we can instead run some custom JavaScript code instead. So typically that'll be for more advanced scenarios where maybe you need to go off, maybe and contact the web API, maybe you need to perform some sort of complex operations on the form itself via a button press. So that'll be where the JavaScript actually will come in useful. But we're going to keep things simple today. We're just going to focus on building out a simple URL action. So all we do at this point is we just populate it with the details. So the address is basically the URL we want it to open up to when the button is clicked. We can specify in terms of how the URL is opened up, so I'm just going to set window for that. So typically if you are opening external URLs, maybe for URLs for a separate system, you may want, it's probably going to be desirable for you to push in parameter values, so you can actually do this. So for example, if you've got the ID of a record that from an external system that you're storing on the entity level yourself, you can grab that, pass it as part of the URL, and then screen pop out into that external systems record if you need to. But again, we're not going to worry too much about that today. We typically also want to maybe just make sure that we're renaming the IDs of these from a best practice standpoint. So I'm just going to rename this here to command. So open Power Apps is this one on here. We're also going to do an enable rule as well. So what we're going to do, just to basically show you, it's not a particularly useful enable rule, but just to show you how they sort of behave, we're going to add on one where if we've set the name of our entity record to a specific value, that's going to be what basically toggles whether the button it shows on the form or not. And we can see on here we've got a few different add steps buttons on here. So for example, we can have it so that maybe based on the type of client that's been opened, we can have conditional or rules, how many records have been selected. The one that we're concerned with today is going to just be our value rule. So on this one here, we're just going to say, okay, the default for this is false. We're going to put in our field name value of first name for that one, and we're just going to say Power Apps is the value that we're expecting. So provided that it meets this rule on here, the first name value of our entity record is Power Apps, the button will show and be enabled in the application. So again, we're just going to name that to here. So Power Apps button enable. Okay. At this point, then all we need to do, we can see that we've got the enable rule tagged to our commands. That's all good and ready to go. We're just going to rename this button on here, so we're just going to call this Open Power Apps instead. And the final thing we just need to do is tag on the Open Power Apps button on here. And now things are basically good and ready to go. We can get this change pushed out into our application, see how our entity record behaves when we start to mess around with it. So all I'm going to do at this point is click on the publish icon up here. It's going to warn me just to take a backup. I think it's always, in terms of if you're doing any ribbon amends at all, make sure you have got a backup first before you do any changes, because potentially if you get something wrong, or the ribbon could potentially break, and you could be pushing out a disruptive change that could affect users in the application. So always make sure you do a quick backup first before you do anything. And all it's going to do at this point is going to build the ribbon and export the solution out. So we're probably just going to pause here for a few seconds whilst it sort of imports in, and we'll jump back when things are ready to go. Okay, so that's finished basically pushing in now. We've got a few warnings on here that maybe we had some empty labels on there. So typically, as I say, if we're doing things properly, we'd make sure that we address that. But for now, our button is now deployed out and it's ready to go in the application. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back into our Dynamics, our Power Apps portal over here. I'm going to go into the MB-400 solution that we've been working through as part of the previous videos, and we're just going to give the model-driven app a test drive in there. Then all we're going to do is that we're going to go to the contacts entity, and we're going to create a new contact. At the moment we can see we've not got anything visible on there in terms of buttons, so I'm just going to basically just pop those details in on there. So test, just call that test for now. I'm going to save that. And we can see that straight away our button is actually loaded up and is ready, and it's basically based on the rules that we've got on there. So I can click on Open Power Apps. That's going to open up the portal in a separate tab for me, which is really useful. If I was to change the name of this, so to maybe another value instead, let's just save and close that. We can see because we're no longer meeting the conditions for the button to basically render, it's vanished from the application. So enable and display rules can be really helpful and useful in determining how and when buttons become accessible to the user based on either simple or complex business logic. So use them to your benefit when you are making your ribbon customizations at all. So that pretty much wraps it up for this video. So hopefully today you've seen how you can perform a really simple and easy ribbon amend using the Ribbon Workbench. The Ribbon Workbench is a really fantastic tool. We really do owe Scott Giroux, the creator of the tool, a lot for what he's done here. He's basically taken what would be a very complex process involving modifying XMLs, as you can see down here, and instead given us this really great application to work with. So yeah, always make sure you're using the Ribbon Workbench when doing either simple or complex button amends. It's really going to help you along and speed along your development. So I hope this video has been really useful in preparing, in sort of helping you to revise for the exam. Be sure to check out the other videos in the series so far. We've been covering quite a lot of different subjects, such as Power Apps, working with PCF controls, working with business rules, JavaScript, etc. So be sure to check those out if you are a little bit unsure in those areas and wanting to get prepare yourself for the exam. So thanks again. Like, subscribe, and I'll catch you again soon. Cheers.